I am Laura, and this is my story. The night my father burned my lottery check was warm and strangely quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. Our red brick house in Columbus, Ohio stood beneath an orange sky, the maple tree out front spilling shadows over the yard. Inside that house were the people who had shaped me, my father Martin, my mother Evelyn, and my sister Clara, and in one reckless moment, they would also unmake the family I thought I knew. I had driven home that evening with a strange sense of courage. In my purse was a folded check for $250 million, a fortune born from a single impulsive purchase at a gas station 2 months earlier. The day I'd matched the numbers, I'd screamed so loudly that my cat bolted under the couch. For the first few days, I didn't tell a soul. I just sat with the knowledge that life as I knew it had shifted, silently, permanently. When I finally told my parents, their reactions didn't match the dream I'd built in my mind. Mom cried, her hands pressed to her face, thanking God for our blessing. Clara froze. Then she laughed, a single sharp laugh that made me uneasy. And Dad, my practical, hard-working father who fixed everything with a hammer or a plan, looked at me like I'd just announced a crime. He said, "No one needs that kind of money, Laura. It changes people." He was right about one thing, it changed everything, though not the way he meant. A week later, Clara called me crying. She said she'd been thinking that maybe I could give her half. Half. She said it like it was already hers, like I was keeping her from air. When I told her no, that I'd help her someday but the money was mine to decide, she hung up. She didn't speak to me again until that night. Dad called that morning and told me to come by for dinner, said we needed to talk things through as a family. I agreed, trying to believe in some small chance of peace. I put the check in an envelope. Part of me wanted to show it to them, to make it real, to make them proud. I didn't realize that pride was already gone from our house. When I arrived, Clara was in the yard, arms crossed, her eyes already sharp. The smell of grilled corn filled the air, and Dad stood by the barbecue, tongs in one hand, beer in the other. Mom smiled too brightly, her voice trembling when she said, "Let's just talk, darling." I should have known. The argument began softly. Pleading tones from Mom, guilt-soaked words from Dad. They said I'd been unfair. They said I had forgotten who loved me first. When I reminded them that I'd worked hard all my life, that the ticket had been mine, Dad's voice rose. "Money makes people selfish," he snapped. "You're letting greed blind you." I wanted to laugh, me greedy. I'd offered to buy Mom a new car, pay Clara's college debts, even repair the roof Dad had been cursing for years. But no, they wanted half, an equal split, as though I were a vault they had built. Finally, Dad held out his hand. "Let me see the check," he said. Something in me hesitated, but I handed it over. I thought he just wanted to look, to feel the paper and maybe calm down. He studied it for a second, then without warning, he turned toward the grill. "What are you doing?" I asked. "If you can't share with my beloved daughter," he shouted, "then you don't deserve this money either." Before I could move, he held the check above the open flame. Time broke. I lunged forward, but heat struck my hand. The paper curled instantly, the edges darkening, flames licking the zeros that represented everything I dreamed of. Clara gasped, but she didn't stop him. Mom screamed my name, half pleading, half scolding, as if I'd brought this on myself. The air filled with the bitter scent of ink and fire. When it was done, only a black scrap fluttered to the ground. Smoke rose like a cruel flag, marking the end of something invisible but real. Dad's chest heaved. His face was red, proud, righteous. "There," he said. "Now no one has it." I stared at him, this man who had taught me to ride a bike, who once carried me to bed when I fell asleep in the car. He looked like a stranger. "You burned my future," I whispered. He scoffed. "You burned this family the moment you said no." I left. I didn't shout or cry. I simply walked to my car, my palms still tingling from the heat. The house behind me glowed faintly in the dusk. As I drove away, I heard Mom calling after me, but the sound was small, swallowed by the night. The thing they didn't know, the thing that made me almost smile through the ache, was that the check wasn't the money. It was just paper. The day before, my lawyer, Mr. Reed, had arranged for the full $250 million to be transferred safely into my private account. He'd looked me dead in the eye when he said, "Paper burns. Numbers stay." I hadn't realized how true that would become. When I reached my apartment in downtown Columbus, I sat in the dark for a long time. The city lights blinked below my window, cars whispered through the streets, and I let the quiet wrap around me. I thought of all the years I'd tried to make them proud, working double shifts, sending part of every paycheck home, forgiving every slight. And still, one refusal had turned love into fire. I poured myself a glass of red wine and called Mr. Reed. "It's done," I said. "They burned it." He paused. "Then it's good you listened." "Yes," I said softly. "It's good I did." He asked if I wanted to report anything, but I said no. There was nothing to report. What could the police do? Arrest a man for burning a symbol? The money was safe. I was safe. But something inside me had turned to ash just like that check. I walked to the window and looked out at the wide stretch of the city. Beyond those lights lay possibilities. New York, maybe Los Angeles, perhaps even London one day. The world suddenly felt open, but it also felt empty. I realized wealth wouldn't fix what had broken in that yard. Still, it gave me a choice I'd never had before, the freedom to walk away. That night, I packed a single suitcase. By morning, I'd be gone, away from the house where love had been conditional and loyalty had burned faster than paper. The flames had taken a check, but they had given me clarity. They thought the fire ended my fortune. In truth, it began my freedom. When I left Ohio, I felt like I was walking out of a storm that had lasted my whole life. The air on the plane to New York City felt thin and dry, the kind of air that carries both endings and beginnings. I sat by the window, watching the ground fall away until all that remained of my old life was a pattern of lights and roads. I didn't cry. I didn't even look back. My father's voice, my mother's tears, and Clara's silence stayed behind with the ashes of that burned check. New York greeted me with noise and motion, the rumble of taxis, the flash of headlights, the low hum of ambition that seemed to hang over every block. I rented a small hotel room in Manhattan for the first week, just to breathe and think. From my window, I could see the skyline, proud and unapologetic. I told myself that here, no one knew my story. No one saw the girl whose father burned her fortune. I was just another woman chasing something new. 2 weeks later, I bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, $1.5 million, paid in full. I'd seen the house in a listing online, a narrow 3-story with a blue door, white stairs, and tall windows that seemed to invite the morning in. When I stood in front of it for the first time, the agent said, "It's quiet for the city." She was right. The street was lined with maple trees, their leaves whispering in the wind like a promise of peace. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust and old paint. The wooden floors creaked in the most comforting way. I walked from room to room, imagining my life filling the space, the kitchen bright and full of laughter someday, the living room soft and calm. Upstairs, I found one room with light spilling through the windows like honey. I painted it pale gold and called it my light room. That's where I placed a big oak writing table, a soft green couch, and a vase of white tulips that I changed every Monday. For the first time in my adult life, I learned what peace sounded like. It wasn't silence. It was the soft hum of the city outside, the clink of a spoon against a mug, the sound of my own footsteps on the wood. I began to make coffee every morning, the rich smell filling the kitchen as sunlight crept up the walls. I'd sit by the window with a notebook, writing lists of things I wanted to do, not goals, not achievements, but experiences. Walk along the river. Visit a jazz bar. Donate without being asked. Live quietly. One afternoon, I took the subway to the East River. The water shimmered like slow glass, and I stood there for an hour, watching the boats pass. People hurried by, chasing deadlines and dreams, but I stayed still. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was falling behind. I had already arrived. That week, I met Olivia, who owned the little bookshop at the corner of my street. The bell above the door chimed when I walked in, and she looked up with a smile that could warm anyone. "You're new," she said, her accent soft and European. She told me later she was from London. We talked about books, about the kind of stories that make you ache and the kind that make you whole. I bought 6 novels and a journal. The next day, she left a note tucked inside one of the books. "For the next chapter of your life." Then there was James, the handyman who came by when the sink started leaking. He was tall, quiet, with kind brown eyes that seemed to understand more than he said. When he finished fixing the pipe, I tried to pay him extra, but he refused. "You already paid what's fair," he said. Later, I found out he had a daughter in college struggling with tuition. I sent him $1,000 anonymously through a community fund for her school. It wasn't about generosity, it was about choice. For once, I was giving because I wanted to, not because someone demanded it. A week after moving in, the calls began. First came Mom. Her voice trembled through the line, heavy with guilt. "Laura, your father didn't mean it. We were all upset. Can we just talk?" Then Dad called. His tone was firmer, like a man still trying to control a story that had slipped away. "You're making a mistake, Laura. Family is everything. You can't just shut us out." And then Clara. She didn't apologize. She just said, "You've changed. You think money makes you better than us." I didn't shout. I didn't defend myself. I said the same 4 words to each of them. "No, not right now." When I hung up, I felt my hands shake, but my voice had not. For the first time, I'd said no without fear. I wasn't their daughter to control anymore. I wasn't their wallet or their regret. I was just me. That evening, I sat in the light room as the sunset painted the walls orange and pink. I looked at the green couch, the oak table, the vase of tulips, and I smiled. Everything in that room was mine, not bought out of revenge or to prove a point, but because I loved it. I ran my fingers along the window frame and whispered, "This is my key." The next morning, I started walking through my neighborhood more. I learned the rhythm of the city. The man who sold fresh bagels at the corner, the woman who played violin outside the subway, the laughter of children at the park on weekends. Every face was a reminder that life moves forward, always. Some nights, I'd light a candle and write letters I never sent. Letters to Dad, to Mom, to Clara. In them, I said everything I never could aloud. I wrote, "You burned my check, but you didn't burn my strength." I wrote, "Love doesn't mean giving everything away." And sometimes I wrote nothing at all, just my name, again and again, until it felt like it belonged to me again. When Olivia invited me to a book reading at her shop one evening, I almost said no. But I went. The room was small, filled with laughter and the smell of old paper. A young poet read about loss and forgiveness. I didn't cry until the last line. Some fires destroy and some reveal. Afterward, Olivia handed me a cup of coffee and said, "You look like someone who's starting over." I nodded. I didn't tell her how true that was. In those quiet weeks, I realized that healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or closure. It just slips in like morning light under a door, and so, every morning, I opened that blue door and stepped into my new world. When winter ended and the days began to warm again, I decided to go west, to Los Angeles, a place I had only seen in films. I wanted to stand by the ocean, to breathe salt air instead of city fumes. I rented a small white house near the beach for $8,000 a month. It had glass walls that opened to a patio, a single palm tree in the yard, and a view of the sea that changed color every hour. Some mornings it was gray and soft. Other days, it glittered like liquid gold. I lived quietly. Each morning, I wrote in my journal, sometimes only a few lines, sometimes pages. I was not writing for anyone else. I was trying to find myself inside the silence. I swam every evening, feeling the cold water lift the noise from my mind. I stopped wearing watches. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped needing to explain why I had walked away from everything familiar. Los Angeles was kind to me in its strange way. People there seemed to live in layers, some chasing dreams, others hiding from them. On weekends, I drove down the Pacific Coast Highway with the windows open and the radio low. The wind tangled my hair, and I thought about how many people had stood on these same cliffs, trying to figure out who they were. One afternoon, I walked into a small shelter in Santa Monica. A handwritten sign on the door said, "Volunteers welcome." Inside, a woman named Maria was painting a wall the color of lemons. Her smile was warm but tired. She told me the shelter had been struggling, leaky roofs, broken beds, not enough funds for meals. I asked her what she needed most. She laughed softly and said, "Hope mostly. And maybe paint that doesn't peel." That night, I transferred $50,000 to the shelter's account. The next week, the place smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. The women there hugged me even though they didn't know my full name. I didn't tell them about the lottery. I didn't tell them about the fire. I just said I wanted to help. For the first time, giving felt pure, not poisoned by expectation. But peace is rarely free. It demands something back. My family began reaching out again, more often, more desperately. Dad sent long, rambling messages that began with apologies and ended with guilt. He said, "You've proved your point, Laura. You've had your space. Now do the right thing." Mom left voicemails late at night, her voice cracking as she said she couldn't sleep. She begged me to come home, to talk, to remember we're still your family. Then came Clara. She didn't call. She went public. She posted pictures of me, old ones from our childhood, and wrote captions like, "Money changes people." My sister forgot who she was. People shared her posts, left comments full of pity and judgment. How could she abandon her family, they asked. How can she live with herself? I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even read most of it. I blocked the noise. I spoke only to Mr. Reed, my lawyer, and Olivia, my friend in Brooklyn. Mr. Reed said I could sue for defamation, but I didn't want a courtroom war. Olivia said, "She's hurting, and she wants you to hurt too." I knew that was true. At night, I lay in bed and told myself the truth I had been avoiding. Money didn't make them greedy. It only revealed what had been hidden there all along. It showed the imbalance, the quiet favoritism, the expectation that love meant obedience. I had been the one trying to earn affection that should have been free. The hardest part wasn't losing them. It was realizing they'd never really seen me, only what I could give. So I chose silence. I didn't block their numbers, but I stopped answering. I let the distance harden into peace. Every message left unread was a small act of self-respect. Every day, without confrontation, was freedom bought not with dollars, but with discipline. Still, there were nights when loneliness crept in like the tide. I would sit on the patio and watch the ocean swallow the sun, and for a moment, I missed them. The smell of Mom's cooking, Clara's laugh when she wasn't angry, even Dad's heavy footsteps down the hall. Then I'd remember the fire, the shouting, the sound of paper turning to ash, and the longing would quiet. After a month in California, I booked a flight to London. I didn't need a reason. I just wanted to walk through a place that had lived many lives before mine. I rented a small flat in Notting Hill, close to a cafe that sold perfect black coffee and croissants so buttery they melted between my fingers. I spent £2,000 on an art and story course at a nearby studio. The instructor was a woman named Elise, soft-spoken, with silver hair and a French accent. She told us, "Every painting tells the truth the artist is afraid to say." That sentence followed me for days. I painted a scene of fire, orange, gold, and gray smoke rising, but in the middle, I added a woman standing calmly with her back turned, untouched. When Elise saw it, she said, "That's peace. It costs more than money." In London, I walked through old parks lined with bare trees. The air smelled like rain and stone. People spoke softly, and no one knew who I was. I liked that. I liked being nobody. But after a week, I started to miss the rhythm of home. The smell of New York coffee, the sound of the subway, Olivia's cheerful texts about new book shipments. So I flew back to America, back to the life I was quietly building from the ashes. When the plane landed, I looked out at the skyline and felt something I hadn't in months: belonging. Not to a family, not to a city, but to myself. I understood then that peace isn't a place or a purchase. It's the decision to stop letting pain rent space inside you. I unpacked my bags, watered the plants, and sat at my oak desk again. On the first page of a new notebook, I wrote, "Peace has a price." I paid it in silence, not cash. Then I underlined it twice. That night, I called Olivia. "I'm home," I said. "Good," she replied. "You sound like yourself again." And for once, I believed her. By the time spring returned, I was ready to build something permanent, a life that belonged entirely to me. The years of noise and pleading, of phone calls that ended in guilt, were behind me. I wanted quiet, not loneliness, but peace. So, I left the city again, driving north from Brooklyn until the skyline disappeared and the trees began to stretch high and wild. I stopped when I reached a small lake in upstate New York, its surface still and shining like a mirror. There was a house there, a 2-story home with white siding, a wide porch, and a single maple tree that threw long shadows across the grass. The moment I saw it, I knew. It felt like the ending I'd been walking toward. The house cost $2.2 million, but I didn't hesitate. I paid in full, no loans, no hesitation, no one's permission needed. The realtor handed me the keys and said, "It's peaceful here. Sometimes too peaceful." I smiled. That's exactly what I want. Inside, the house was bright and simple. The kitchen had pale wooden counters and wide windows that framed the lake like a painting. I cooked breakfast there the first morning, eggs, mushrooms, and toast, and laughed out loud at the absurd joy of it. Not loneliness, freedom. Every sound in that house was mine. The click of my shoes on the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the porch swing when I sat with coffee and watched the mist rise from the lake. There was a red canoe tied at the dock. I'd never paddled before, but one afternoon, I pushed it into the water. Awkward at first, then steady. The lake held me gently. The trees bent over the surface, their reflections trembling. I thought about everything that had burned, my check, my bridges, my illusions, and realized none of it mattered now. What mattered was that I had survived without losing myself. Weeks passed like that, quiet, intentional, clean. I built a small library in the living room with shelves that reached the ceiling. I filled it with novels, travel books, and blank journals. Olivia from Brooklyn sent me boxes of books with handwritten notes tucked inside, for your mornings by the lake. Sometimes James drove up on weekends to fix small things, loose boards, the old fence, a faucet that leaked when it rained. He always brought fresh bread from his wife, and I paid him more than he asked, though he never liked it. "You're spoiling me," he said once. "No," I told him. "I'm just saying thank you properly." Life had finally slowed down enough for me to hear my own thoughts. But peace, I've learned, always tests you before it stays. One Sunday afternoon, the sky was clear and the air smelled like wet earth after rain. I was on the porch reading when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up, and my heart stilled. 3 figures were walking toward the gate. Dad, Mom, and Clara. They hadn't called. They hadn't written. They just came. Dad's hair had gone gray at the edges. He looked smaller somehow. Mom's eyes were red, her hands wringing a handkerchief. Clara, dressed too perfectly for the countryside, stared down at the ground as they walked. They stopped a few feet from the porch. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Only the lake moved, soft and silver behind me. Finally, Dad said, "We just wanted to talk." His voice was rough, hesitant. I stood. About what? He took a deep breath. About us. About what happened. Mom's voice cracked. "We're sorry, Laura. For the fire. For the things we said." Clara looked up then, her face tight. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I was angry. I thought you'd forgive us sooner." Forgive. The word felt heavy in the air, like smoke from a fire long gone cold. I stepped down from the porch, my bare feet pressing into the cool grass. "You came all this way to ask for forgiveness?" Dad nodded. "That and maybe a fresh start. We've been struggling, Laura. The house needs repairs. Your mother's health isn't what it was. Clara's business, didn't survive the pandemic. We're not asking for all of it, just some help to get back on our feet. I let their words settle between us, like stones sinking in water. Then I said quietly, "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry for what you lost." Dad blinked. "That's not fair. It's true," I interrupted. "You burned a symbol to punish me. You didn't know the money was safe, but you still chose to hurt me. You wanted me to suffer for saying no. That wasn't about the check. That was about control." Mom started crying again, softly this time. "We made a mistake." "Yes," I said. "And mistakes have consequences." Clara's eyes filled, but she stayed silent. "I don't hate you," I told them. "But I don't owe you anything. Not money, not forgiveness, not another chance to use me." I reached for the folder I had placed on the porch table earlier that morning. A strange coincidence, or maybe some instinct. Inside were lists of counselors and family therapy centers in both New York and Ohio. I handed it to Dad. "If you truly want to fix what's broken, start there. Not here." He stared at the papers, then at me. "So that's it?" "That's it," I said. "No checks. No cash. Just a door you can open yourselves." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mom whispered, "We love you, Laura." I smiled sadly. "I hope one day you'll learn to love me without conditions." They left quietly. I watched as their car disappeared down the gravel road, the dust rising behind them like a faint echo of the fire that once consumed everything between us. When the silence returned, it didn't hurt. It felt clean. As the sun dipped behind the trees, James stopped by to tighten a loose porch board. He waved, and I waved back. Later, my phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "New display at the shop. Wish you were here to see it." A second message followed from Mr. Reed. "Proud of your boundaries." I sat on the steps with a cup of tea, watching the sky turn soft pink. The lake reflected the color like glass. I thought about all the money in my account, all the houses I could buy, the cars, the clothes, but none of it meant more than this moment of stillness. This was wealth. Not numbers, not things, freedom, choice, peace. The check had burned years ago, but the fire had not destroyed me. It had refined me. And as the evening wind rippled across the lake, I whispered to myself, "This is my life now." Not a life of gold taps or loud cars. Not one built on guilt or apology. A life with keys I own, rooms I love, and people I trust. The money stayed. The pain faded. But most important of all, I stayed with myself.